Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive with us. Today we're going to be talking about Abu Bakr.
Very interesting topic.
Yeah. Yeah, this one's going to be a little bit controversial. Potentially.
Yeah, it might ruffle some feathers.
A little bit spicy. But that's what we're here for, right? Deep dive. So we're looking at Abu Bakr from a Shia perspective.
Right. And specifically, we're going to be using a book called Al-Nas wal-Ittihad, which translates to...
Text and reasoning.
The text and reasoning, yes. And that's by the renowned Shia scholar Sayyid Sharafuddin.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but Sayyid Sharafuddin was not just a scholar, but he was also kind of like a community figure, like a uniter. He really wanted to bring people together.
Yeah, that's right. He was really big on trying to bridge the divide between Sunni and Shia. And I believe he would even celebrate the Prophet Muhammad's, peace and blessings be upon him, birthday with both Sunni and Shia communities.
That's amazing. Like that's a...
Yeah. He was really dedicated to trying to find common ground and build bridges.
Really living what he was preaching, that unity.
Yeah, for sure.
And also, I believe he founded the Jafari school.
Yes. To educate a new generation grounded in both religion and science.
Amazing. Wow. So not only a scholar, but also a community leader and founder of a school.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's, it sounds like he really was a very interesting person.
Yeah, very influential, for sure. And he wrote this book, Al-Nas wal-Ittihad, that really digs into the Shia perspective. And we're going to be focusing in on the Shia perspective on Abu Bakr's actions.
Okay. So I think we should start with one of the biggest sticking points, and this is something that always comes up when we talk about this period of early Islamic history, is this concept of Abu Bakr as Siddiq,
right?
Meaning the truthful.
The truthful one, yeah.
And, you know, the Shia perspective challenges that a bit,
right? Yeah, especially when you look at, when you look at the issue of inheritance.
Right, yeah. So in the Quran, it clearly states that prophets do leave inheritance. Yeah. And this is something that Sayyid Sharafuddin argues. He says Abu Bakr actually denied Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, the right to leave behind inheritance.
Right.
Despite it saying it in the Quran.
Right. And we're going to dive into the specifics of that, the implications.
Yeah. I mean, where do we even begin with this? It seems like such a...
Well, I think a good place to start is with the Saqifa event.
Okay. Now, the event of Saqifa, for people who might not be familiar, what exactly happened there?
So immediately after the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, passed away, a group of prominent companions gathered at this sheltered area in Medina called Saqifa, and they gathered there to decide on the leadership of the Muslim community.
So that's where they chose who the first caliph was going to be.
Exactly.
And of course, Abu Bakr was elected caliph. Now, how does the Shia interpretation of Saqifa differ from the Sunni understanding of this event?
So the Shia perspective is that the rightful successor, according to the Prophet Muhammad's peace and blessings be upon him, own instructions, was Imam Ali, peace be upon him.
Okay.
And they see the events at Saqifa as a deviation from what the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, had intended.
Okay, so we had this gathering of companions that are electing Abu Bakr, and the Shia perspective is saying, no, Ali, peace be upon him, was actually the rightful successor based on the Prophet's peace and blessings be upon him instructions.
Exactly. And Sayyid Sharafuddin in Al-Nas wal-Ittihad uses this event as kind of a foundation for his arguments against, some of Abu Bakr's decisions.
I'm seeing how this could be controversial. It sounds like, so basically the Shia view is that the first caliph was illegitimate, essentially.
Right. And they see Abu Bakr's caliphate as sort of the beginning of a deviation from the true path of Islam.
Okay. So how does this concept of nas and ijtihad that he keeps talking about, how does that apply to this specific event of Saqifa?
Well, he's saying that, there's the Nas, which is the explicit text, like what the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, said about the succession. And then there's the Ittihad, the reasoning that people applied to the situation.
And from his perspective, the reasoning was flawed.
Right. He's arguing that the companions who chose Abu Bakr didn't correctly apply the Ittihad to the Nas, to the textual evidence.
Right, because they didn't follow the Prophet's peace and blessings be upon him instructions, essentially.
Exactly.
Okay. I'm starting to see how this framework works. But, we've talked about Saqifa as this foundational event, but are there any other specific events from Abu Bakr's rule that Sayyid Sharafuddin looks at in his book?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the big ones is the story of the army led by Usama bin Zaid.
Okay. Now, this army was assembled by the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, just before he passed away.
Right.
And it's meant to go into Byzantine territory.
Yeah, it was a pretty significant expedition.
And Usama, he was very young at the time.
Extremely young, yeah, like 17 years old.
Wow. So you can imagine there were probably some concerns about, him leading this army at such a young age.
Oh, absolutely. There was a lot of pushback. Even Umar, he questioned Usama's ability to lead.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But Abu Bakr insisted that they carry out the Prophet Muhammad's, peace and blessings be upon him, command to send this army.
And what's the significance of Abu Bakr sending this army out from a Shia perspective? What are they saying about it?
So the Shia view is that, sending this army out, while it seemed like it was following the Prophet's peace and blessings be upon him instructions, it also meant that key figures like Umar were away from Medina during a very crucial time.
Right after the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, had passed away.
Exactly. So they're seeing this as a strategic move that potentially weakened Imam Ali's peace be upon him position.
Interesting. It's like they're saying it was maybe a calculated move to consolidate power.
Potentially, yeah. And this is something that Sayyid Sharafuddin really digged into in his book.
This is getting really interesting because we're seeing how these events, which might seem isolated at first glance, could actually be connected in a way that supports the Shia narrative.
Right, exactly. And this is what makes this whole deep dive so fascinating, because we're really questioning these assumptions about Abu Bakr's rule and the early history of Islam.
Absolutely. I'm already starting to see things in a new light. And we're just getting started.
There's so much more to uncover.
So much more. I'm excited to keep going. But first, I think we need to take a quick break. We'll be right back with more of our deep dive into Abu Bakr, seen through the lens of Shia scholar Sayyid Sharafuddin. Don't go anywhere.
We'll see in a minute. Be right back. Welcome back to our deep dive into the Shia perspective on Abu Bakr. Before the break, we were talking about some pretty impactful events early in his caliphate. The gathering at Saqifa, the army of Usama. All these things seem to, in a way, challenge that traditional Sunni view of Abu Bakr as Siddiq. Yeah. And Sayyid Sharafuddin, in his book, Al-Nas wal-Ijtihad, he really goes into detail about a lot of these events and tries to apply the principles of Nas and Ijtihad, that text and reasoning, to analyze Abu Bakr's actions.
And I think one of the things that really stood out to me from our discussion so far is this idea of, leadership in early Islam.
Right.
Because it makes you think, after the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, passed away, there must have been this immense responsibility.
Yeah, huge shoes to fill.
To lead the community, and the potential for mistakes, even if you had the best intentions. You're human, you're going to make mistakes.
Exactly, yeah. And that's where, this idea of ijtihad comes in.
Right, the reasons.
The juristic reasoning.
Yeah.
And Sayyid Sharafuddin is saying that sometimes Abu Bakr, even though his intentions might have been good, maybe he relied a little bit too much on his own interpretation of things rather than, what the Quran and Sunnah clearly stated.
Can you give me an example of where he sees that happening?
Sure, yeah. So one example is the issue of muta.
Okay, temporary marriage.
Temporary marriage, yeah. Which was actually permitted during the time of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him.
Oh, wow, okay.
And some companions, including Imam Ali, peace be upon him, they continued to uphold its permissibility even after the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, passed away.
Okay, interesting. So it was allowed, and then what happened?
Well, during Abu Bakr's caliphate, and it was actually reinforced later on during Umar's rule, muta was prohibited.
So hold on. A practice that was allowed during the Prophet's peace and blessings be upon him time, it was just completely overturned.
Yeah, they basically argued that it was no longer a valid practice.
Wow. How does Sayyid Sharafuddin address that?
So he uses this as an example of where maybe, personal reasoning kind of took precedence over the clear practice of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him.
Interesting. So he's saying, even though these were prominent figures,
yeah,
their own judgments, maybe they deviated from the actual teachings.
Right, exactly. And that, human judgment can sometimes be flawed, even if you're in a position of authority.
It makes you think, right? If things that were practiced during the Prophet Muhammad's peace and blessings be upon him, time could be changed based on someone's interpretation.
Yeah.
How do we, even as Muslims today, know what to follow?
That's a really good question. And it's something that scholars have been debating for centuries, right? But I think Sayyid Sharafuddin's point is not to necessarily create doubt or confusion, but to really encourage people to think critically.
Right, to engage with the sources.
Exactly, yeah. To analyze the arguments, to understand different perspectives that exist within the tradition. It's not just about blindly following one interpretation over another.
It's about like having an informed, like thoughtful approach.
Exactly, yeah. And grounding yourself in, the Quran and the Sunnah
Mhm.
and making sure that your understanding is aligned with those sources.
Yeah, this is so fascinating. But it's also like kind of heavy, because it's making me question a lot of things I thought I knew about early Islamic history.
It is, but I think it's important to remember that, history is never really black and white. And even the people that we might hold in high regard, they're still human, and they're capable of making mistakes.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely given me a lot to think about, and I'm looking forward to diving into even more examples from Sayyid Sharafuddin's book. But before we do, are there any other key takeaways that you think our listeners should be aware of at this point?
Yeah, one thing that I find really powerful about Sayyid Sharafuddin's work is this emphasis on seeking knowledge from diverse sources. Like, he was really big on engaging with different perspectives, even those that might challenge your own beliefs.
Yeah, that's huge, especially today when we have so much information available to us. But it's also easy to get stuck in these echo chambers where we only hear what we want to hear.
Right. And Sayyid Sharafuddin, he was all about stepping outside of those comfort zones and really exposing yourself to a variety of different viewpoints. Because he believed that that's how you grow. That's how you gain a deeper understanding of your faith and your history and ultimately yourself.
Wow, that's really powerful. So to summarize, he's saying, look beyond the surface, engage with different perspectives, and remember that even the most revered figures are still human.
Exactly. I think that's a great way to sum it up.
This deep dive has been a real eye-opener, and I hope it's been the same for you, dear listener. We encourage you to continue exploring, questioning, and seeking knowledge from a variety of sources. Remember, learning is a lifelong journey, and it's a journey best traveled with an open mind and a thirst for understanding.
Absolutely. And engaging with these challenging ideas can really be a catalyst for growth and deeper understanding. So keep learning, keep questioning, and keep seeking knowledge. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.
Wow, I mean, we've really gone deep, haven't we, into this Shia perspective on Abu Bakr.
Yeah, this has been a really insightful journey, I think, through Sayyid Sharafuddin's work.
Yeah, Al-Nas wal Ijtihad, really interesting book. This made me look at a lot of these events, these early events in Islamic history, in a totally different light.
Yeah, it really challenges a lot of assumptions that we might have.
And I think one of the biggest things that keeps coming back to me is this concept of Siddiq,
The truthful.
the truthful, Abu Bakr's title.
Yeah, and Sayyid Sharafuddin's analysis, it really makes you question that title, doesn't it?
Yeah, especially when you consider his stance on prophets and inheritance.
Right. The Quran, it's pretty clear that prophets do leave inheritance.
Yeah, it states it explicitly.
But Abu Bakr, he denied Fatima, peace be upon her, her inheritance of Fadak.
Right, the Prophet Muhammad's, peace and blessings be upon him, own daughter.
Yeah. And, how do you reconcile those two things? How do you square that circle?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it's definitely it's a tough one to grapple with, for sure.
And it raises questions about leadership,
Yeah.
Like, how do you lead a community after the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him?
Yeah, that's a huge responsibility.
And what happens when those in leadership positions make decisions that seem to contradict the teachings?
Right. And Sayyid Sharafuddin doesn't really give us like a clear-cut answer, does he? He just lays out the arguments and kind of leaves it up to us to decide.
Yeah, he's more about encouraging people to think critically, to use their own ijtihad.
Yeah, that text and reasoning. He wants us to grapple with the evidence ourselves.
He's not trying to tell anyone what to believe, but he's definitely he's pushing us to really engage with these ideas.
And I think that's one of the most valuable things about this deep dive, is it's really made me realize the importance of seeking knowledge from different sources.
Sure. It's easy to get stuck in our own little bubbles.
Right, like echo chambers.
Yeah, exactly. But Sayyid Sharafuddin, he dedicated his life to promoting dialogue between different Islamic schools of thought.
And he really believed that that was the key to understanding each other.
Yeah. And, to building a more united and harmonious Muslim community.
And I think that's a message that's so relevant today, especially with all the division and polarization that we see in the world.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that we need to be open to hearing different perspectives, even if they challenge our own beliefs.
Yeah. because ultimately that's how we grow. That's how we learn and evolve as individuals and as a community.
And isn't that what Islam is all about? Constantly seeking knowledge, striving to be better.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, listeners, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the Shia perspective on Abu Bakr. We hope this episode has sparked some curiosity in you, encouraged you to explore different perspectives on Islamic history.
Remember, knowledge is a journey, not a destination.
And it's a journey best traveled with an open mind and a willingness to learn. So keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep seeking knowledge from a variety of sources. Until next time, peace be with you.